Sup guys, in this video I'll be going over the changes I made to my battleships tier list as I've done for the Vanguard and Carrier ones already. If you haven't seen them, they'll be linked in the description below. Aside from the new ships, I also reintroduced a bunch of ships back into the tier list that I had removed, but with some caveats. Alright, let's just get right into it. I don't think I really have to talk about Lion much, she just brings the most damage without any fussing around. In second place is Alsace. Just like Lion, she brings a ton of damage. She falls short in a couple places compared to Lion, having a preload but slightly lower damage per salvo compared to Lion, and her damage buff for the fleet isn't unconditionally permanent like Lion's. So you either need Alsace to fire first, so everyone in the main fleet gets it, or you have to bring a French Vanguard ship to make it permanent. While those conditions aren't really difficult to fulfill, and even if you don't bring a French Vanguard and Alsace doesn't fire first, she still doesn't lose out on too much. But those are the reasons she ends up falling comfortably in second place. Next is Mecklenburg. I had her ahead of Alsace originally, but I decided to be a little bit more conservative with her for now until I've gotten the opportunity to try her out for real. This might irk some people as she's pretty hyped up at the moment, and for good reasons, but here are just some thoughts that came up while thinking about her placement for this update. A couple of things we know for sure are that she should be the best battleship, or even just the best main fleet ship overall against heavy armor in terms of damage output, due to her self-buffs and barrage modifiers. And then a lot of her potential is locked behind sortieing with Bismarck's Way. About 15% damage just from the firepower bonus and her extra debuff strength, but also, when sortied without Bismarck's Way, her reload is a little bit on the low side. For the reload part, you could use her with another Ironblood ship, but why would you really? She's clearly designed to be used with Bismarck's Way, having one less point in reload so that Bismarck can fire first and summon her black hole, and then Mecklenburg can apply her empowered debuff after. While the black hole is quite big, it doesn't cover the entire field. Assuming that her debuff checks whether the enemy is affected by the black hole at the moment it's applied, I don't think it will be uncommon for the enemy to just happen to be not within the range of the black hole when Mecklenburg's debuff is applied, causing it to miss out on the extra 5%. If it is the case instead that the stronger version of her debuff is only active when they're being affected by the black hole, and it's constantly updated, then the stronger version of the debuff would only apply for less than 3 seconds, which would be arguably worse. Then, even under ideal conditions, her debuff has 10% strength and lasts for 8 seconds, which is much less effective than Lion and Alsace's for the Vanguard fleet, something that might not be considered when doing individual calculations. There's a pretty big opportunity cost of running them both together at all times. Bismarck is far from an ideal choice against heavy armor, and Mecklenburg, while good, isn't the most impressive against light. Running them together against the light armor boss means that you would have to miss out on one of the other amazing options, in Lion, Alsace, or Fritz Rume, just to name a few, and running them together against heavy means you can't run the Soyuz Nakimov or Amagi Shinano duos. Right now, if I had to say where she will excel given all the ships and equipment we have, I would say that Mecklenburg and Bismarck would be top of the line against medium armor, but the margins are tiny compared to other combinations like Soyuz and Nakimov. And against heavy, it would not surprise me if bringing Mecklenburg alone without Bismarck would even end up being better than bringing both, although bringing them both wouldn't be much of a downgrade compared to whatever the hypothetical best fleet would be. Anti-heavy fleet compositions featuring Mecklenburg will require at least 2 of her guns from research for optimal performance, which will take a few more months. Let's wait for September to roll around and see what the IJN overlords bring us. Hopefully she gets a chance to shine before Shinano retrofit or something gets dropped on her head. For now, we can only speculate, and I'm giving the nod here to Alsace, who has not only proven herself but will likely remain as a premier option against light armor. Anyway, it's only one position. I think Mecklenburg's ceiling is still under Lion, but her floor should be no lower than 3rd. Aside from contributing the most amount of damage in most cases, these top 3 battleships also have the perk of storing multiple salvos, which I thought was just going to be limited to Alsace since she's the first UR with a preload, but it seems like that's just the new norm. Next up, I have Soyuz. Not only does she make the strongest carrier even stronger, but she is also the most straightforward way to guarantee all of your damage lands. In a full battleship composition, her 40% slow is generally enough to ensure that everything lands, and in a mixed fleet, she's going to be used with Nakhimov anyway. Her personal damage is the lowest against the light armor, but even against the light, she's still perfectly usable, like against Kawakaze meta despite all of the competition, although she's definitely not the best possible option. I have her above Bismarck for reasons I've explained in the past, but essentially I find that her slow is more reliable than the black hole for ensuring your damage lands unless there are multiple enemies, which is kind of rare, and occasionally there are enemies that don't move at all, and a black hole, by pulling them in, actually makes some of your damage miss. Once I finish Mecklenburg and a couple of her guns, if it turns out to be the case that the Soyuz-Nakhimov duo is generally outperformed by Mecklenburg and Bismarck, then I'll put Mecklenburg over Alsace and Bismarck over Soyuz. Next up is Musashi, who is now relegated to being the best campaign battleship, with her main fleet protection skill that is to this day the only way to guarantee your healers don't get randomly sniped by enemy battlecruisers and battleships. She also used to have a niche as the best battleship against heavy armor, but that has been firmly supplanted by Mecklenburg. Next up is Raffaello, who, similar to Musashi, is also a campaign-only battleship, as her only selling point over other battleships is the legitimately high amount of healing that she has. While she can't protect your healer like Musashi can, she helps your vanguard stay alive much more so than Musashi, so you can opt to run something like Raffaello with Aquila and have enough healing to not have to bring a normal squishy healer like Unicorn or Zueho, although it wouldn't necessarily be optimal. Something else I wanted to point out about her is that she's the only Rainbow battleship that has come out since Alsace who didn't get the extra salvo capacity perk. Not sure what she did to deserve this, but it is quite unfortunate. Next up is Kearsarge. She's fallen off a little because with Alsace and the addition of Lion, there's not much point to run the duo of Kearsarge and Yorktown anymore, which had been the best core against light armor. However, you can actually run her without Yorktown, much more so than running Yorktown without Kearsarge, and she'll still do a lot of damage. About the same or more than the ships in the S- tier, while also increasing the damage of your other battleships. Also, since she has both airstrikes and guns slightly desyncs from each other, if you put her in the top position of your fleet with Z-52 in the fleet, you can get more uptime on Z-52's debuff than with most other battleships, but it's a pretty negligible bonus all things considered. The final ship in S tier is Vanguard. She's a force multiplier who doesn't really have a preference for one armor type over the other. She's not going to find herself near the top 3 anytime soon, but she also ages a lot better than other battleships because the stronger the strongest ships get, the more value her debuffs contribute. Currently, battleships are more in style than before, which benefits her as she provides a bigger damage increase to battleships than other ship types. Alright, moving on to the S- tier. These are ships that are still very strong but just overshadowed by multiple ships in the S tier. I have UVH at the front because she's the most unique. She's pretty good in campaign boss fights because her cross-fleet barrage helps a lot with interception in the mob fleet, and then her high damage uptime with her cooldown reduction mechanic helps chew through the pesky mobs before the final bosses. While she does offer that over the other 3 ships in the same tier, most of the time you can bring at most 3 battleships in campaign, with 2 being the most common to achieve airspace supremacy, and there are just better options in the S tier. Her damage is also fine in single boss fights, keeping up with the others in S- tier against light armor, but she doesn't work as well with the typical buffs and debuffs from the likes of Helena and on-fire buffs like Soyuz and Trafalgar, or root effects that typically happen once every 20 seconds or so. Next are New Jersey and Warspite with her new unique augment. They're both single target specialists that deal high damage against any single armor type with the right gun. Their damage output is outclassed by almost all of S tier, and I don't really recommend using them in campaign at all due to their lack of AoE damage. I prefer New Jersey for her armor break debuff, but Warspite edges her out if there are HMS synergies in your fleet. You can't really go wrong with either though, if they're all you got. The last ship in S- is FDG. I used to have her higher in S- because she's the best of the bunch in campaign mobbing, but there are a lot of gold ships that are almost as good as her now, if not on par for the same role. Even though her damage on paper is fine in boss fights, in fights where she can't proc her retaliation barrage, her damage is lackluster in comparison to other S- options, which happens in fights like Kawakaze meta. And that about wraps up the S- tier. Moving on to the A tier, I'm actually going to go out of order and first talk about Duke of York and Dyson, and then I'll talk about all the others after. I've got Duke of York here because she's the best gold universal battleship buffer. If you have any 2 rainbow battleships in the fleet, putting Duke of York to buff them will more or less get you the best results using any other gold ship, because rainbow ships are just that much stronger than most gold ships when it comes to single target damage. She just has one major flaw, which is that her base reload is very low for modern standards with no reload buff. This is okay for medium and heavy armor because she can use the twin 457 without losing out on too much, but there's no similar option for HE ammo. I hope she'll get an augment that increases her reload significantly, whether through the stats on the augment or from an added buff. Then, Dyson is one of those rare gold ships that can almost deal as much damage as the weakest rainbow ships, but only really against light armor. She just has really high stats and buffs, and then her Barrage is a powerful, single-target focused HE salvo that's essentially just a glorified main gunshot. On the surface, her skill descriptions are very misleading, because you might think she would actually be more of a campaign ship, having a Barrage and a seemingly strong heal, but she's actually on the weak side compared to many of the other ships in A tier and even below, because her recon plane does not get shot down at all, so her heal straight up doesn't exist, and then her Barrage is aimed and has no AoE. Now, the rest of the ships in the A tier and Read the Kit tier are all ships that excel in campaign mopping, and have been tested by me in Chapter 14.4, but the result of all that testing are only observations, as data is not really that useful in this case. All of the testing is documented, by the way. Just search Battleship testing log on my channel. It's not really possible to rank each of them in order because they all have their strengths and weaknesses. Some ships have higher damage output, some have more AoE, some have defensive support for other ships, some have better damage uptime than others, and the list goes on. It's literally impossible to create an unbiased control fleet and then sortie each of these ships with it to see which one is objectively the best, unless you're delusional. You should just pick the one that suits the rest of your fleet best, or pick one that you really like, and then build the rest of your fleet around their strengths and patching up their weaknesses. For instance, Odin has very powerful ghost secondary guns with extended range, equivalent to adding a powerful gun destroyer to your fleet. If your vanguard is something like Brest, Scylla, and Guam, then having those powerful secondaries will help a lot. But if your vanguard already consists of 3 gun destroyers, using Odin is going to be redundant. She also has torpedo damage reduction for your vanguard on pretty decent uptime, which is going to help large cruisers with heavy armor a lot more than light armor vanguards. How can I possibly quantify whether her secondary and torpedo damage reduction, with also her powerful timed lightning spear barrage, are objectively better than Owari's straightforward, much stronger main guns and guaranteed AoE barrage on fire? I just don't think it's possible. Anyway, I did choose to highlight these 4 ships specifically by putting them in A tier, but it's still more or less based on vibes, so take it with a grain of salt. Rodney meta simply has both the highest damage output and AoE of all the damage-focused ships. Tamaki has better interception than most with her increased secondary gun range, and her barrage is special in that it's split up into many parts that are weaker than other barrages, which is actually a good thing in campaign. For example, if there's a random mob ship with 1000 HP remaining, one part of Tamaki's barrage will hit it and kill it off, and the rest of it will switch target to something else. There are other barrages that deal more damage, but comes out instantly, that will overkill the shit out of that 1000 HP enemy and then mostly go to waste. Next, Kazan is the only ship I haven't tested the same way as others, but her strengths are easy to understand. First, she has a powerful and reliable barrage, with an arcing part that can hit shielded enemies, and then normal bullets following up to clean up stragglers. Here's where I'm gonna have to go on a bit of a tangent. There are 3 common types of barrages. First is the targeted arcing ones, for example New Jersey's and Dyson's. The barrages come out instantly, so if it targets a ship that barely has any HP left, it will just overkill that one ship and go to waste. These are not very good in campaign. But there are also ones like Musashi, Tamaki, and Fubuki from Senran Kagura, which come out in smaller parts, and these are not prone to overkill and are much better in my opinion. Then there's the fixed arcing type like Monarch, Gascon, Hood, and so on. These cover a large area, but their effectiveness can vary based on whether or not the enemies are actually inside the areas they cover. Since they cover a huge area, they're often a little bit weaker against a single enemy, but they can still be quite effective. Taking Hood's Barrage as an example, you can see that it showers this area with AoE damage, but ships in these areas might go completely unscathed. The third type are Straight Shells. They generally have the highest amount of total damage but are very spread out and completely stopped by shields. These types of barrages are very weak on their own, but there are barrages that are a combination of 2 or very rarely even 3 of the types I just explained, in which case the straight shells part of the barrages are actually important to help clean up the mobs that are left over by the main arcing part of the barrage. For example, we can look at Izumo's Barrage, which is half arcing and half straight. The arcing portion will strike the priority targets that typically hover around the center of the field, although not guaranteed, and the shielded enemies are also typically there. And then the follow-up straight portion will hit any stragglers that are missed by the first part. Kazan has both the fixed arcing type as well as the straight type, which is typically a recipe for success in campaign. And on top of that, she has a decent amount of healing targeted at the ship that needs it the most. It's very consistent as well, and all of this without fully compromising her damage like an actual healer, although her barrage isn't the strongest. Those are the reasons I believe she should probably be better than most of the others. The last ship in A is Izumo, who simply has very, very high stats and a barrage that is half fixed, half arcing, like I showed, and with very high damage numbers. In the Read the Kit tier, these are ships that will easily get you past Chapter 14. They're not ordered by strength, but rather by how easy they are to obtain, with Hood being from Metal Exchange, and then the ones at the end being limited to collaboration events. Really, all you need is a single one of these if you somehow don't have anything in the higher tiers, and you'll be able to make a ton of progress in the game. Just pick your favorites based on character design, or use whichever one you have if you're super early in the game. From my testing, I noted down that the conventionally strongest are Owari, Alvitar, and the collaboration units. However, keep in mind that this is based on Chapter 14, and in Chapter 15, the anti-air stat itself becomes a lot more important just to increase a battleship's survivability against planes, so the relative rankings might be more in favor of ships with higher anti-air in Chapter 15 than Chapter 14. And then finally, I've got the A-star tier, which are SSR faction buffers that are still somewhat worth using. In the current meta fight, you can build a fleet with 2 or 3 good French ships without Richelieu, and adding Richelieu in that case is much better than pretty much all other gold ships, and maybe even as good as some of the weaker rainbows. For instance, in this fleet here, if you replace Richelieu with a gold ship that most players would consider to be much better than Richelieu in a vacuum, like Dyson or Flandre, the success rate of the fleet would decrease. The same goes for Nagato against heavy armor, when paired with Shinano and Amagi. I don't think any other non-rainbow battleship can be used to similar success. Unfortunately, not only are there a ton of UR battleships, and battleships also just don't have any special roles like healers for carriers, so it often feels like there's an insurmountable gap in the power levels between the URs and the golds, which is why using golds that buff URs ends up leading to better results than using quote-unquote stronger gold ships. Okay, that about wraps up this update. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.